Only darkness was the vision that I could perceive. Inside my mind, all that I could witness was a brilliance of darkness. I was lost inside an enigma, but I slowly found an exit through the obscurity. I opened my eyes. I was lying on a bed. I did not know the reason for which I was laying down. I had a disgusted sensation lingering inside my mind that slowly triggered down into my eyes and made them sting and feel heavy. It traveled through my mouth, which made my saliva feel thick, went all over my fingers, and then my stomach, which twisted my insides and arose the sensation of vomit, and it kept traveling and enduring inside my body, my mind, and my senses. I was perplexed to realize that I had escaped an enigma of darkness and entered a room that was utterly as dark, and that disgusted sensation still remained. I stood up on a bed that was regularly slimy, but the sensation that concerned me was not the sliminess, it was an extremely strong thirst, a thirst that I have never felt before. My face felt extremely wet. Therefore, I touched it to wipe away the liquid. At first the liquid felt like sweat, but as I looked at my hands, the liquid had a dark red tint and was smeared all over my fingers and palms. This was not frightening and I did not feel worried about anything whatsoever. My eyes then fixated on the room's atmosphere. As I investigated, I realized that the bed was covered in the same red liquid and my body had stains from it. I looked around the room and saw that it was completely empty except for the bed, 2 windows, and a door that was closed. I stared at the windows but the glass was covered in a dark slimy substance. I then gazed at the floor and saw it covered in the same red liquid, deep red, dark red, murky red. There were piles of knives scattered throughout the floor, so many that it was difficult to see any detail of the genuine floor. I slowly placed my feet on the ground, feeling the cold liquid moving around and in between my toes, and the edges of the many knives that were in my area cut into my soles and pierced my skin. I looked at all of the knives near me and picked up the cleanest one. I held it tightly with a strong grip. I slowly took a step towards the closest window in an attempt to stare and look outside of the room, but to my dismay I was not able to see anything outside. I was only able to glare at the detail of the dark substance, which appeared as thick and slimy as mud. I then realized that there were many teeth, nails, pieces of skin, and hair stuck inside and on top of the thick substance and were tainted as dark as it. I did not feel frightened or petrified. I did not feel anything whatsoever. I did not feel anything. I then turned and slowly walked towards the door, stepping on the many knives which kept piercing my skin, and I could hear the sound of the red liquid move from the force of my steps. As I walked, my eyes were completely mesmerized on the door and stared at nothing else. The door had stains from the same dark substance that was on the window as well as on the doorknob. Gripping the knife in my hand tightly, I reached for the doorknob and opened the door very slowly, hearing it screech, which echoed throughout the room. As I glanced out the door, I witnessed a long hallway that had a very narrow pathway to walk in. The hallway walls were covered in red liquid, a new coat for the usual white, beige walls that I would typically see. The hallway floor was the same as the one in the room, full of the red liquid, but instead of knives, there were multiple decapitated heads, covered in the liquid, dissipated all over the floor. Some were half of a head and many were completely dismantled. There were many teeth scattered throughout the floor and eyes and tongues, dismembered body parts all over the hallway, multiple fingers, nails, hands, arms, legs, torsos, and feet. A couple of fingers and legs were still twitching around the floor, creating splatters from the liquid and making a noise like fish splashing on a small puddle. There were guts and body intestines that had completely smeared everything in the hallway. Mutilated brains were scattered throughout the floor and multiple pieces of stomachs and hearts and kidneys. I stared into the hallway, which seemed endless, and saw the gruesome carnage throughout the surroundings. From the entire slaughter and obliteration of body parts, there was one dismembered head that was not dismantled, but it was covered in the red liquid. It was lying right next to me, reclining the back of its head on the wall, and as I stared at it, its eyes were fixated on my face. Its eyes glared at my eyes and slowly I saw its lips move, saying, "It's only a nightmare." The words slowly came out of its lips and I repeated them. "It's only a nightmare." The head's mouth then slowly turned into a big smile that appeared to get larger every second I stared at it. I got on my knees and picked it up. The red liquid was gushing out of its neck and dripped all over my legs, which created an echo of drops that emulated throughout the hallway. I looked at its eye and stabbed it with a knife I was carrying. I stabbed it deep and gouged the eye out of its socket. The head did not make any movement against my attack, and it did not appear startled. It only smiled and said, "It's only a nightmare." I looked at the eye, which was dripping a flood of red liquid, and it gazed at me. I then slowly and gently placed it in my mouth and took a bite. The head smiled wider and kept repeating as if it were a chant or a spell, "It's only a nightmare," over and over again as I tasted and ate the head's eye. In every single bite that I took from the eye, I could hear an oozing noise coming from my bites. The eye was still stuck on the knife, and as I was devouring it, the knife started cutting my lips. I was bleeding profusely from my gums and lips, which soaked my body, and the blood kept oozing and dripping. As well, the eye profusely oozed out the red liquid, and it dripped with my blood as if the two liquids could not blend, but only danced between one another. The head kept repeating, "It's only a nightmare." I held the head next to my body as I finished eating the eye and stared at it. The blood from my lip was dripping all over the floor and all over the head. It only smiled and said, "It's only a nightmare." I felt drowsy, and I could not keep my stance. I fell on my back. The floor did not feel hard or rough. It was soft and comfortable. The room slowly started to fade away. I closed my eyes.
I was quite young back when we were fooling around with my dad's old CD radio system. If I recall correctly, I was 16 when I pulled it down from the attic in the house and found myself asking about it at the dinner table that night. He explained what it was. I could communicate on shortwave radio around the area. He offered to set it up and show me how it worked. Now, this was the age before the internet, so my friend, Tom, and I were fairly excited to be using it. The unit sat in my bedroom for a few months, and we had fun trying to talk to the truckers out on the highway or the various farmers or herders nearby. Many just ignored us or jumped frequency. We'd jump through them all and speak to anybody who would answer. On channel 29, we began talking with somebody who seemed to be around our age. He said his name was Bobby. We hardly got further than cracking jokes and talking about playing pranks and giving fake traffic reports at first. It was all pretty exciting, but eventually, after a month or two, we agreed to meet up with Bobby. We asked for an address, and he told us he lived on a farm just off Harris Road, around 15 or 16 miles out of town. So Tom took his parents' car one overcast Saturday afternoon, and, as the rain broke out, we made our way down the highway and pulled off where we heard Harris Road was. Nearing a split country road, we spied the name of the farm on an old wooden sign that Bobby had told us about over the radio. We pulled up through the drive and took the car right up to the farmhouse, expecting to see him waiting for us. Instead, we were faced with a rundown, dilapidated farmhouse, towered over by what appeared to be a barn falling over its struts. Common sense should have told us to leave, but despite initial confusion, we were convinced that Bobby merely hung out here, that he had found the old radio system in the barn, where he usually told us he was when he talked to us. We got out of the car and crunched across the old stone pathway to the barn, pushing the huge doors open with a deafening creak. We called out Bobby's name, heard nothing, and debated looking further. Eventually we decided to head in, Tom leading the way. Upon rounding the first corner, we found the old radio system, sitting up on an old workbench, still online, with a number display lit up and the receiver still crackling away with static. But it was the rotten human bones, laying across the workbench, that made us run. I was home alone for the week, as my family had gone on vacation while I had to stay and work. It was around 2 a.m., and I'd stayed up to watch a scary movie in the dark in my basement. I was intent on really scaring myself and seeing how far into terror I could really go while still knowing I was safe in my own home. It was then that I heard pounding footsteps on the first floor. This was a common annoying occurrence when my family was home, as every time they passed through the front hallway, past the basement door, I heard their footsteps. This time, fear immediately shot through me at the sound. My reflex was to turn the television off immediately. The basement door was up a flight of steps and around a corner, so whoever it was would not have seen any light. I heard the basement door handle click and turn as I sat in absolute darkness. I moved slowly so as to be absolutely silent, and crawled behind our large television. As I passed it inch by inch, I noted with panic that its black screen still dimly glowed. I heard footsteps coming down the carpeted but creaky stairs. I froze in my hiding place, listening. For many long minutes, I heard nothing. Had the intruder seen the television's afterglow, or had it faded in time? Was he standing in the pitch dark, listening for me? I seemed to lie there in total silence for an interminably long time. My panic began to fade, and I began to think more clearly. Had I really heard an intruder? Could someone possibly be standing there in silence for so long without making any noise? The basement was so exceedingly quiet that the silence itself began to hurt my ears. Could the unknown person really avoid any noise, from shuffling or breathing or anything else? If there was an intruder, he was still in the basement, because the creaky stairs were incredibly loud if the door handle clicked, and he wouldn't know to mask his footsteps on the first floor so that they couldn't be heard down here. I began counting in my head, trying to pass the time, as drool fell from my mouth onto the carpet. I didn't dare risk the sound of swallowing. I reached 60 seconds once, twice, 30 times, 60 times. By now my fear had faded and I was more confused than anything. I estimated I'd been crouched in the absolute black for almost 2 hours and had still heard nothing. If there was an intruder, none of this made sense. Finally, I decided I'd have to make a move. If I did nothing, eventually the sun would come up and shine in through the small basement windows. And, worse, I began to smell something horrible and cloying. Slowly, ever so slowly, I began inching my way towards the stairs, by way of the walls. If someone was standing there in the dark, I should be able to go around them and then make a break up the stairs. Meanwhile, the horrible odor grew stronger. Had something died down here in the night? No living person would smell like that. Terrible images of some sort of corpse monster listening for me in the dark erupted in my thoughts, and I moved as fast as I could without making a sound. Just as I finally approached the stairs, there was an enormous clatter, as of something falling or collapsing on the floor. It was at that moment I leaped forward and crashed up the stairs, running out through the open basement door and my wide-open front door. Now certain that someone was in the house, I called the police from my cell phone and watched my house from afar. The police came, checked inside the house, and then grimly came back out to question me. They'd found a body in the house. My elderly neighbor, who seemed to have died of a heart attack. Their belief was that I must have left the front door unlocked, and he must have wandered in my house while dying, looking for help. At first, I felt horrible, thinking that I had sat there in the dark, while the old man literally died a few feet away. Then it occurred to me. What the hell was that loud noise of things falling that last prompted me to bolt up the stairs and out of the house? I asked the police and they confirmed the back door of my house had been left open as well, near a single bare footprint in the mud. Somehow, for some reason I'll never know, there was someone else in that basement with us. Silent, waiting, and listening in the dark over the fresh corpse of an old man.